What's up, guys? Welcome to the Win Daily Thursday Night Football Preview. Going down for DraftKings Showdown slate. Breaking down this Thursday night game we have the Washington Redskins going into Minnesota to take on the Minnesota Vikings. Spread currently is at Vikings minus 16 with an over-under at 42. So let's dive right into our roster construction for Thursday Night Football. So basically, one of the biggest things here is that Adam Thielen is out in this game, which makes Stephon Diggs someone that you need to play in your lineups for the Showdown slate. You don't want to necessarily fade a guy like Diggs. It just makes too much sense against a team like the Washington Redskins. The matchup is really good on paper. Josh Norman is also coming up as questionable, just another corner that's just even worse for the Washington Redskins, and Stephon Diggs is going to see plenty of targets in this game. So I do think that Diggs is someone that you definitely want to have as at least a flex in your lineups for tonight's game. And then for the captain spot, I will have to admit that it has to be all about Dalvin Cook. So looking at Dalvin Cook, basically he is going to probably smash this year. He's overall the RB2 in fantasy of the year. He ranks 4th in the NFL in rushing yards, 583. He scored in every single game outside Week 5 and faces the Redskins defense that has allowed the 9th most fantasy points to the running back position. Specifically, they've actually allowed the 5th most receptions to the running back position. So that's bodes extremely well for Cook, who is a target monster in the passing game at the running back position. He has 28 targets on the season, 4 per game. So I think that he's really in strong consideration for the MVP or captain spots in DFS single game formats such as DraftKings. The Redskins are allowing 123.7 rushing yards, 29.7 rushing attempts, and 1 rushing touchdown per game on the road. So I'm going to slot in Dalvin Cook here as my captain in this lineup build that I'm doing with Stephon Diggs in there at the flex. The other receiver that you should really also mention is Olabisi Johnson. So he is a receiver that is going to be probably filling in for Thielen. We saw him get a lot more work. There will be another receiver outside of the Stephon Diggs that will get targets in this game. So whether that is Olabisi Johnson, whether that is Kyle Rudolph or Irv Smith Jr., one of those guys is going to produce. And at the receiver position, I do like Olabisi Johnson as a guy that's going to generate targets. Thielen, again, is out in this game, so Stephon Diggs, I think, is just a must-play. I don't think it's something that you should try to be contrarian in. I just think that he is in a smash spot. He's produced when he gets targets. He's going to get enough targets in this game, even if the Vikings end up running the ball a decent amount, which is why I like Dalvin Cook a little bit more. But I would say, perhaps if you want to get away from Diggs and Cook, maybe that you don't play them in the same lineup. That's definitely possible. If it's just going to be a Dalvin Cook game, then do that. But I do think that Diggs still is a guy that is going to generate a lot of targets in this matchup. Looking ahead at the quarterback position, so I know a lot of people are going to be probably drawn towards Kirk Cousins, but I'm not so convinced. Kirk Cousins has been playing really well as of late, but that's kind of the thing it's been as of late. We've seen the Vikings blow 16-point favorites at home before. It happened last year against the Buffalo Bills, and they lost 27-6 outright, and that was after a Kirk Cousins game where he threw for 425 yards and 4 touchdowns. So we've seen this picture before. He's on prime time. Kirk Cousins on primetime on Thursday Night Football specifically is 1-5. So that's not a narrative that's like, oh, we have the revenge game narrative. Like, that's more of a made-up kind of narrative. Like, yeah, he's going to be more motivated. But the fact that he actually is 1-5 on Thursday Night Football, that is an actual thing. Like, he is not good in prime time. It's just a fact. So even though he's averaged over 25 fantasy points per game over the last 3 weeks, I am kind of afraid of Kirk Cousins, and I really think that Case Keenum is actually probably a better play in this matchup. If you combine to the game script of the Minnesota Vikings really pounding the rock, and I think that means the Redskins are going to have to throw the ball a little bit more to kind of keep up. I don't anticipate the Redskins winning this game, but I do anticipate it to be closer than a 16-point spread. If you just look at Keenum in the games where he's not been benched or has played in a torrential downpour like last week, he's thrown for at least 2 touchdowns in 4 games. He's averaged 17.77 fantasy points. It would not surprise me at all to see Case Keenum outscore Kirk Cousins in this matchup. So that is why I am fading Kirk Cousins in favor of Case Keenum for a matchup on Thursday Night Football. The matchups are basically kind of the same across the board. Washington gives up the 12th most fantasy points, while Minnesota gives up the 13th most fantasy points. So that's why I really like Case Keenum a little bit more because the Vikings have been shredded by the secondary the past 2 weeks. Wentz and Stafford have both averaged 24 fantasy points per game against the Vikings. So I am rolling with Kirk Cousins and with Case Keenum. And the last thing to note, when the Vikings are at home, their opponents are averaging 40.3 passing attempts per game, which ranks number 1 in the NFL. So I'm going to roll with Case Keenum as my quarterback. I think that fading Kirk Cousins is perfect in a primetime spot where he's probably going to garner a lot of ownership because he's been hot. And that's another thing with Case Keenum. So on Monkey Knife Fight, we are doing a free deposit. So basically, one of my favorite prop bets for Monkey Knife Fight, and you can check it out at the URL mkf.win/daily. You get 100% matching deposit bonus. 200.5 passing yards. We've taken the over for Case Keenum. And if I'm taking the over on Case Keenum for 200.5 passing yards, that definitely means that I'm going to be taking the over on a Monkey Knife Fight prop for Terry MacLaurin at 62.5 receiving yards. So Terry MacLaurin is the rookie wide receiver from Ohio State. I think that he's in an absolute smash spot in this matchup. He didn't produce last week, but that was really because of the weather. The weather was a big concern last week, so it really didn't allow a lot of the Washington Redskins receivers to do much of anything. But if you look at McLaurin, when he's been targeted this season, he's put up a 146-point passer rating, averaging 17.9 per reception, to go along with 17 first downs. The Vikings ranked 28th in the league in first downs allowed through the passing game at 15. And over the last 2 weeks, the Vikings have allowed the third most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. MacLaurin needs to be in your DFS lineups, and I think that he is a good captain/MVP exposure. I think he's a good candidate for that outside of Dalvin Cook if you want to be a little bit more contrarian on Thursday night and stacking him with Case Keenum, of course. That he's the only Redskins receiver I really like. I would say that Trey Quinn is probably the best punt play. We saw Danny Amendola last week really rip up this Minnesota Vikings secondary from the slot, which is where Trey Quinn primarily lines up. So guys, make sure you go check out monkeyknifefight.com. So that's at mkf.win/daily to get 100% matching deposit bonus and take the overs on Case Keenum and Terry MacLaurin. Before we wrap up, we just want to talk briefly about the tight end positions. I mentioned before, Kyle Rudolph could see more work. Irv Smith. I'm going to really kind of hand on the side of old BC Johnson. So the tight end that I actually like the most is a guy by the name of Jeremy Sprinkle. So Jeremy Sprinkle is someone that is a tight end on the Washington Redskins. There is no Vernon Davis. There is no Jordan Reed. And Jeremy Sprinkle is actually in a good matchup. If you look at the statistics for the Minnesota Vikings, they are actually allowing the most targets to the tight end position this season. They've allowed the most targets and the second most receptions, but 0 touchdowns. Basically, what that's telling me is that this touchdown regression is going to happen for the Washington Redskins, with Jeremy Sprinkle most likely the recipient of that type of regression. So I like his idea and his fact that he's going to catch a touchdown in this game. And at $3,400 on DraftKings, he's a really cheap guy that you can fill into your lineups. And lastly, finishing things out, so the Vikings defense is also a solid option this week. I do think the Redskins are going to have to throw a lot more, so I think that they're more likely to turn over the ball. And then Kirk Cousins is always in line for a disaster game, so the Redskins defense and the special teams can also be in play. You always got to play defenses on the showdown slates. They always end up doing something outside of some of these skill players, so you need to make sure you have exposure to either both or one of these defenses for tonight's game. And last but not least, we just want to bring up the guy of the hour, Adrian Peterson. He is coming into this game with a high ankle sprain, so I don't know if he's actually going to end up playing in this game. It looks like that he's going to play. That's what he said so far. The matchup is absolutely terrible on paper. The Vikings' run defense has been excellent this year. They have allowed, no other running back has rushed for 53 yards against them, and only one has gone over 100 yards against them, and it took 23 carries. Now, there is a scenario where Adrian Peterson gets 30 carries in this game because the Redskins are on #EstablishTheRun. So it's not impossible, but it's going to take a lot, and I would say that Peterson is more of a just that DFS play where you really want to be contrarian. It's going to really take a lot for him to really do it. But Wendell Small would be an interesting option, a pivot off of Peterson if Peterson is out in this game. But Peterson is really, really revenge game narrative driven, so he's probably going to get a decent amount of ownership for that reason. But I don't think you can just completely fade him because of the fact that, hey, he could blow up in this spot. We've seen it on Thursday Night Football where running backs, even in tough spots, do blow up in a big way. So looking again, Dalvin Cook, again, I'm going to be having into my captain spot. So I had to take Diggs out because I didn't have enough salary. So other guys I mentioned. So if you end up going with adding in, let's say here, the Vikings defense as an option, and then with 3,100 in the flex position, you can add in another defense. So you can even play the Redskins defense as an option here as well if you think that Kirk Cousins is going to struggle. So this is an interesting build here. So I have actually kind of an onslaught of Washington receivers. So assuming that Case Keenum is going to throw for a lot of yards, Redskins defense here, hoping that the Kirk Cousins-led Vikings cause turnovers, and going with the Vikings D and Dalvin Cook, as Dalvin Cook I think is just going to be the majority scorer of the Minnesota Vikings in this game. And then you have the Minnesota Vikings defense there as well. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this kind of Thursday night breakdown. Good luck to you in the Showdown slate tonight on Thursday Night Football. And let's bring home some money. And make sure you go check out windailysports.com for all your Thursday Night Football content, along with all the content for the upcoming slate of games. See ya!